Consider this your viewer discretion warning. This is a collection of allegedly true dark web horror stories, and wherever your imagination just took you, I want you to know that it's true, and it gets worse. So let's get started. Alright, so check this out. As has been stated in a number of other stories on the net about the dark web, if you don't have a reason to be on the dark web, then stay off it. Obviously, I recommend understanding the technology, get to know what a VPN is, understand how Tor and encryption all works, but only for the sake of knowledge and an understanding of security. I'm all about understanding technology and really getting to know the layers of the internet, but don't go looking for illegal or questionable content because if you look, you'll find it. That said, moving on to the story that I wanted to share. This happened several years ago, I'd say early to mid-2000s at the latest. This was a time before the internet was this huge entity that everyone spent all of their time on, when broadband was like 10 megabits per second at most, and Newgrounds was king of the internet. Back then, I was actually a contractor for web development. People and organizations that wanted to have their presence on the net would contact me and I would discuss what they wanted and then build out websites for them. These weren't complex websites like what exists now. They were more like, pages with static content and pictures. Basically just, this is our company and here's what we do kind of pages. It was a good paying gig. Back in the early 2000s, a lot of companies wanted their presence on the web, and I worked with a lot of local corporations. It's not super relevant, but it helps to, 1, let you know how old I am, and 2, lets you know that I understand technology and how the web works. Back then, I was always on the web, looking into competitor sites and seeing what worked where, and pulling inspiration from things that already existed. At one point, I was talking to a buddy of mine, another techie, and he brought up that I should consider looking at the dark web for some inspiration. At first, I was a bit confused. The only things that I knew about the dark web was that it wasn't easy to get onto, and that's where hackers and criminals hung out on the internet. I asked him why he thought I should be going to the dark web, and he made a point that I just couldn't refute. He mentioned that I would probably be the only person in the area that built websites that had seen parts of the dark and deep web. Basically, he was saying that I would have a leg up on everyone because I would have an idea that they wouldn't have. And I kind of agreed with him. So, after chatting with him, he convinced me and I had him come over to set up my system for accessing the dark web. I got on and just started going through some random sites and trying to avoid anything that could be illegal. And I found a neat site that kind of worked like a wiki. I don't think it was actually the deep web wiki or anything like that, but it was a collection of links very similar to it, and some of them still worked. For the most part, they ended up just on dead ends with nothing on the other side. But some of them were interesting forums and just pages with information about random things. I was happily clicking along when I came across a page that kind of looked like the original version of YouTube. If anyone's been around for a while, then you know what I mean. An old, blocky page with the star ratings on the videos. Well, what was weird to me was that a lot of the front page videos were just a black screen. And when I clicked on them, they had an overlay that said something along the lines of, "Video has expired." But what was strange to me was that the titles of the videos were just single words. The first one that I clicked on was titled, "Hang." There was another one that was just called "Electric," and one called "Pain." Obviously, these were a bit ominous, but there wasn't much on the screen for the videos, just the title and a star rating. Hang had a 5-star rating, and it showed that it was rated 40 times, for example. I was scrolling through the front page, and I finally found a video that didn't have a black box overlay. It was titled, "Shoot." The thumbnail for the video was a guy literally sitting in a nearly empty room that was trashed. I clicked the video and it started up pretty quick. I don't know why, but part of me was sitting there thinking that it was going to be a fairly normal video, that it was going to be some sort of vlog or something from the guy in the thumbnail. Instead, what I got was a video of a guy sitting in this dingy-looking room with a syringe in his hand. As much as I wanted to click away, I just sat there and I watched this video as it played out. As the video started, he was just sitting there, staring at the camera, and it looked like he nodded to someone behind the camera. After a second or two, the audio cut in, and I heard him say something like, "For $300, right?" And then a voice said yes. He nodded and glanced back to the camera and basically started saying his name and location. I don't remember where he was, but he said his name was Jeff, and that he was doing this for the site for an amount of money equal to $300, and that this video would serve as his contract. Then he ended with, "And remember kids, don't do drugs." Then, after a second, he situated himself in the chair and tied off part of his arm. Then he took the syringe and shoved it into his arm. Long story short, he shot whatever was in that syringe, I want to assume it was heroin, into his arm, and he was doing this for money. My guess is that this site was set up for people to do things for an audience, and then they would get paid for it. This was like some sort of dark web YouTube or Twitch for people to pay and watch what happened to people in certain situations. Watching this guy have a reaction to the drugs that he put in his arm was horrifying. He seriously just collapsed on the floor and started convulsing, and I really don't want to remember the rest of it. I clicked off of it and went back to the main page, and at that point, the other videos had become clear. Hang. Electrical. Pain. All of these were videos of people doing something to themselves for payment. The fact that Hang had a high rating didn't really bode well with me at this point. I could only imagine what happened on that video that got people to rate it 5 stars. After watching this guy drop to the floor from injecting, again, I'm assuming heroin, I wasn't very curious on the website anymore. I closed the page and decided that I was done with all of that, and honestly, the sight of that guy and the thought of what other videos most likely contained has seriously haunted me ever since. The dark web is a place where you can buy damn near anything for the right amount of Bitcoin, from things like the obvious, drugs, hacking tools, personal information on people that you want to stalk, all the way to things that are much more obscure. Things like exotic pets, hitman services, although most of those are just honeypots, and illegally obtained weapons. Most of the time, when thinking about buying things on the dark web, it's best not to think too much on what you're looking at. You take it at face value and you don't ask questions. You don't want to know where the hell those guys got that block of drugs or the handgun that you just purchased, because odds are, when you get to the end of that rabbit hole, you're going to find that someone is either dead, injured, missing, or being looked for by federal agents. My point is, you really don't need to be on the dark web unless you plan to break the law in some way, shape, or form. That said, there is one service that I found on the dark web that actually made me think about it and what could have, or what could be, happening. And for a bit of backstory, I spend a lot of my personal time on the internet. I do a lot of contractor IT work for larger companies, mostly just data security and security analysis for medium-sized corporations. One of my secondary jobs in my cybersecurity work is what's known as threat hunting. A threat hunter is someone that goes out onto the deep and dark web and tries to find pages that are selling vulnerability information for websites or technologies. Basically, they go and see if a company's information is available to hackers, or if they're using technologies that are being actively exploited. This doesn't have much to do with my story, but it does give you an idea of who I am and what I do for a living, and it helps explain why I was out on the dark web. Now, because I had to find this data on the dark web, which is typically information that was for sale, I had to get in with the people selling the info, and I had to purchase it when necessary. These were legitimate sales on the dark web, and yes, this is a gray area, and yes, there can be issues with doing this, but a lot of the time, it was critical for what I was doing for these organizations. Because of this, I spent a lot of time on sites that were built to sell illegal content. This ties back to how I started this story. The sites that sell illegal content, items, and services, typically you just see these things and you understand they exist, and then you move on. However, there was one site that had something that made me legitimately terrified, mostly because it had two services that were sickeningly tied together. The first service that I saw was one that was, unfortunately, fairly common, which is escorts. A lot of the time, these escorts on the dark web aren't willing participants. They are, more often than not, victims of human trafficking. That alone is sickening and terrible, but the next part made it worse. The website had a service dedicated to assisting immigrants. Now, on its face, that may not sound like much, but put into context with the other side of that, it's incredibly likely that a lot of these immigrants that they were helping were dragged into the human trafficking side as well. Think about it. People entering a foreign country, possibly alone and desperate, most likely not able to keep in touch with family back home, and it's likely that no one knows where they're going to end up. I just kind of sat there and thought about it for a few moments, and it really got to me. The thoughts that someone from another country may be looking to get away from an oppressive government or away from something like the cartel could end up finding this way out. I could imagine they would do so much to scrape together the money just to pay these people that say they would help them, and then they end up being trafficked and sold out as an escort. I know this isn't your normal story, and I apologize if it's a bit strange in context, but it's something that I found on the dark web that actually scared me, and while it was really only an implication and not a confirmation, it's one of those things that when you know how these illegal networks work, it becomes clear what's happening. This story takes place when I was in college a couple of years ago. I was away from home for most of the year on campus and didn't have much going on in my social life. I didn't really socialize, and I wasn't doing much in ways of partying or hanging out with anyone else. Through most of my college life, I only had one real friend, Charles. Charles was a techie, and he was all about the newest trends and technology, and he was always willing to discuss the newest topic if you had an interest. Since I really only had Charles, and I couldn't see my family or my friends at home, I would sometimes get to a point where I was really lonely and feeling like there was no one around to talk to. Now, yes, cell phones were a thing, and I could have just called my family at any time, but honestly, there's something about seeing the face of those you love that just makes it more personal. It makes it feel more connected. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but sometimes I feel like I need to see someone's face to know that they're really there. Anyway, there was one day where I mentioned this to my dad, and I was feeling a bit down about having not seen them for a couple of months, and he decided to take it upon himself to send me a fancy webcam so that we could start doing video chats. I was honestly ecstatic at the idea, and I actually joked about how that was something I should have thought of. He ends up going to his local tech store and buys this really nice full HD Logitech webcam. I have no idea how much he ended up spending on it, but it was a really good quality camera. As soon as I got it, I set it up and got it all running, and then I got on a video call with my mom and dad. I was legitimately excited to have it, and I really felt like this thing was going to be the solution to my socialization issues for sure. For a month or two, everything went pretty normal with it, and the camera itself, or at least how it worked, isn't the focus of the story. But the camera itself was a really good piece of hardware. The image was crystal clear, and it was really easy to use. Unfortunately, it being a good piece of technology meant that Charles liked it as well. Long story short with that, Charles was wanting to start a YouTube channel where he went down internet rabbit holes and solved those weird mysteries on the web. Think people like Frederick Knudsen or Nightmind and such, but dedicated to those weird 4chan mysteries. Basically, he just asked me if he could use my computer to record himself for his videos, and in return, he would be my on-call tech support. I didn't really care about the tech support, and while it was a little weird to have him in my dorm room, I didn't mind it. For the most part, he would text me when he wanted to record, and I would just go for a walk. I'd go get some food, or I would work on homework in the commons of the university. The deal went on for a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 at the most, and he recorded at least 5 or 6 times during this time frame. I watched his first few videos, and they were actually pretty decent. They were good, interesting information that was presented in a clean way. He had one on some missing girl that some people on 4chan were talking about that was pretty well done, and then he had one that explained parts of the deep and dark web. I found it a bit strange when he didn't even bother to ask to use my computer that next week, but I also thought that maybe he was just busy with classwork. Then, when the next Monday rolled around and he didn't have class and he didn't call me, I messaged him and I asked him what was up. He told me that he just wasn't feeling up to doing anything on his channel. I again thought this was odd, but I didn't really push it. Just kind of told him that whenever he was wanting to do more work, just to let me know. What got strange for me was that after this, he seemed to not want to talk to me anymore. Then there was something that happened that legitimately scared the hell out of me. There was one night that I was having a lot of trouble sleeping and was feeling incredibly restless. I was pretty much just lying there and staring at the wall. Then I rolled over and looked at my computer. At first, I didn't notice anything other than a dark screen and the window behind the monitor. Then, after a couple of seconds of staring, something about the scene was just bothering me. Then it clicked. My screen was off, sure, but I had left the tower on. This is something I do every once in a while, but then my eyes moved over and I noticed that the red light on the webcam was blinking. This light only blinks when the camera is in use, and I hadn't used the camera at all that day. I sat up and started to shift out of my bed, and then I noticed that the light on the camera shut off. My groggy brain struggled with this situation, but I decided to get up and just unplug the camera and then try to go to sleep, which didn't quite work. Things got even worse the next day when I needed to get on my computer to do some classwork. It was early in the afternoon when I got back to my dorm and I turned on my computer to do a report. This is when I noticed that there was a document on my desktop titled "Read Me Please." I hesitantly clicked on it and I read what it said. It said, "Hello, Michael. Please don't unplug the webcam tonight. I like watching you sleep. I'm not doing anything bad with the footage, I promise." It was literally 2 sentences and it made me want to puke as I read it. I immediately disconnected my computer from the internet and I called Charles, demanding he come over to help figure out what the hell was going on with this. He was hesitant at first and he told me that he was busy with something else, but I told him that my computer had been compromised and I needed his help immediately. When I said that, he changed his tune. When he got to my room, I found out why he changed his tune. He explained that when he was doing research for his dark web video, he had to go out onto the dark web. He said that while he was doing so, he came across a few sites that were sketchy, but he tried to avoid anything that was too questionable. That is, until he came across a website that required you to accept a prompt to access. He said that it looked reasonable and it just said that you accepted their terms and whatnot, but when he clicked it, the computer locked up and it looked like someone else had connected to my computer. Apparently, he watched as someone else got into my system and basically did whatever they wanted, and he didn't tell me. He said that he was pretty sure they had disconnected and that they hadn't done anything to the computer because part of the agreement page said that they wouldn't use my info for malicious purposes. He said this as if I hadn't told him that this person was remotely accessing my computer to watch me sleep, and as if hackers on the dark web have a code of conduct. I may have gone off on him, telling him that it was the dumbest thing that he could have done and that he needed to fix the problem right then and there. I told him that he needed to get all of my files off the system and then wipe it, or else I would make his life hell, which was a threat that I have literally no idea how I would have followed through on. Thankfully, Charles was a bit timid and he agreed that he would help me. Obviously, this was a few years ago and I'm no longer on the campus, and I'm pretty sure the guy never got onto my system again after that. Despite this, I've literally never slept with a computer in the same room since, and I've always made sure to turn off my computer when I'm done using it every night. I used to be one of those people that liked to go on the deep web just for the fun of it, and I would frequent a number of the underground-style websites. I worked in the IT industry, and for some reason, the deep web and the dark web are those strangely taboo things that we aren't supposed to discuss with normal people, but it's not exactly the best-kept secret either. Those of us that do go out on tour and look at things that are, at their best, questionable, it's almost like we can smell it on other users. We all have this weird sixth sense that can tell if the person next to us is one that peruses the deep. Okay, not really, but typically we can tell by your demeanor if you're someone that knows what they're talking about, and most of the time something on the deep web will come up. I'm the kind of person that knows what they're talking about, probably a bit too well. Let me put it this way. If it was something that was shady, sketchy, unsavory, or otherwise legally gray, I was probably spending some time each and every day looking at it to see what that was. I spent more than my fair share of time on a few deep web community boards, mostly chatting it up with like-minded people that also had way too much spare time on their hands. My favorite pastimes were posting on conspiracy boards. It's crazy what people will say when there's no limit or filter, and honestly, some of the things that they say out there may be more true than what we'd like to believe. Case in point, hitman sites totally exist and are more than likely legitimate businesses. Well, ones that aren't honeypots anyway. Aside from that, there are a lot of marketplaces that exist on the deep web for things that are questionable, but the dark web is where things turn to the downright illegal. I'll admit to having spent my fair share of time and money on the dark web markets. I've bought things that are illegal to own, and I've seen things that I shouldn't have seen, and things I definitely didn't want to see. That said, I wanted to write this quick story about one of the marketplaces that actually kind of freaked me out and made me pull away from the illegal stuff. There was a particular marketplace that existed that touted itself as the be-all, end-all of dark web markets, and it was essentially this massive dark web version of Craigslist or the Facebook marketplace. If you were looking for something that you shouldn't have been and were willing to spend Bitcoin, then you were in luck because odds were that they had it. Bootleg movies? Check. Viagra from another country? Got it. Computers potentially stolen from a government facility? You guessed it, they had that too. However, it got deeper than that. They also had services that you could pay for. Nothing like hitman sites, but if you wanted to quote-unquote have a good time with someone about to die, then you could. And hey, I don't judge others for what they do behind closed doors. I keep my opinions to myself and just live my life. That said, I actually stumbled on something that I initially thought, no way that's real, until I messaged the seller, and then, well, I'm not so sure anymore. It could have been a honeypot or a Fed trap, but if so, it was a damn good one. I was perusing the market one afternoon looking for something stupid. I think I was looking for shoes or something. Don't ask. But when I stumbled upon something that simply was labeled new, I like new things, so I eagerly clicked it and went to read what was so interesting about this new product. Well, this new product wasn't really a product. The description read something like, and I'm just paraphrasing, have access to any age up to 7 and can deliver. Forged paperwork extra. Must have payment ready for any and all offers. Now, obviously, my first thought was that this was a full-on honeypot or a scam for people that were looking for kids, which would be a fairly niche scam if you think about it. So I defaulted to honeypot, and because I was a bit of an edgy 20-something, I decided that I would message the seller and mess with them a little bit. I logged into my account on the market and went to the user to send them a message. I asked something along the lines of, how do we know you're legitimate and not a Fed trying to arrest someone? They responded with, you don't, which kind of solidified the honeypot idea that I had in mind already. I responded with, can you prove that you're legitimate? Have the Bitcoin ready if you're an actual seller. Again, just trying to goad this person into giving me anything that would confirm my personal bias. They sent me a message back saying, boy or girl, and how old. I had to think on this one for a second. I wanted to give him something that would be tough to respond to, so I said, boy, around 5, and he asked me for my name. He sent back some pictures of a little boy that looked to be around 4 or 5 years old. In the pictures, the boy looked pretty happy. He was in a basement area playing with toys, and there was one photo of him watching SpongeBob on TV. I was actually getting a bit nauseous with this whole thing now, so I responded back saying, is he the one that's for sale? At this point, I felt like I needed to grab as much info as I possibly could and then take it to the authorities. The seller responded, he's one of them. Yes. I then asked him to prove that he didn't just send me pictures of his own kid to try and bait me. He then asked me for my name again, which was a question that I had tried to avoid prior. I was a bit nervous at first for obvious reasons, so I told him my name was Marcus. It's not, but you don't tell people on the dark web what your real name is anyway. After I told him my name, I hadn't gotten a response back for about an hour. I was almost certain that he was a Fed that was tracking me at this point. That is, until he did finally respond. I got a message back with an MP4 attached to it, and in the video was the boy playing with a couple of Hot Wheels. In the video, you could hear a man talking, and I'm assuming he was the seller. The man asked the boy what his name was, and the boy said, Tony. The man then asked who was filming him, and the boy said, Uncle Will. Then the man said, who is this video for? The boy said, Uncle Marcus. He then asked, and why are we making this video? And the little boy laughed, then responded with, to find a new mommy and daddy. There was a bit more back and forth to prove that this kid was legitimate and to show that the seller wasn't messing around. He then ended the video with, now that you can see that little Tony here is very real and in need of a good loving home, let's talk payment. I prefer Bitcoin, but I'll take any of the current stable coins. I'll be waiting your response. You better believe that I took that information and video straight to the authorities, in the form of an anonymous communication. I know I'm a bit of a coward, but when you are a criminal taking down bigger criminals, it's best not to put your name on anything. I don't know what happened with the case. I'm assuming they passed it on to the FBI division that handles this stuff, but I haven't been hunted down and arrested or killed yet, so I guess things are going smoothly. And unfortunately, this should serve as proof that, yes, you can literally buy anything off the dark web. Alright, so check this out. I want to preface this story by saying that if you have any curiosity about the deep and or dark web, just get rid of it right now. If you're an everyday user and you aren't in the know of how onion routing, encryption, VPNs, etc. work, then use stories like this one to satiate your curiosity. Don't start down that rabbit hole and don't dig any deeper than you need. That said, let's get into some backstory. I'm a tech nerd 100%. I mean, I'm the type of person that was ripping apart old PCs in the 80s and putting them back together just to see what worked with what. Now, mind you, this was back when I was a kid. I learned about all the tech back then, and I took that passion into my adulthood. So, I work in IT now, if that wasn't obvious. And I know a lot about what goes on out there on the net. Now, that's all well and good, but it's all surface web and surface level tech stuff. The question from here becomes, how does being a geek equal dark web horror story? Simple. I've been there. In fact, I've been there probably more than many of the stories that you've heard on this channel and many others out there. I've seen quite a bit, and maybe I'll give you a few more stories in the future, but this one is just one that I think is worth telling right now, mostly because it's honestly terrifying. Back when I was on the dark web frequently, there was one site that I used to venture towards pretty frequently. Obviously, I'm not naming the site because, as far as I know, it's still out there. This site was kind of like a dark web bazaar. You could buy pretty much anything and everything that you could ever want, and it wasn't terribly expensive either. I used to buy things that were less than legal, and I even used to sell some stuff that was also less than legal. And honestly, this site had everything. Substances, weapons, stolen goods. If you wanted it, you could find it there. The dealers had their ratings that would pretty much tell you how reputable they were, and the higher the rating, the better the overall service or quality of what you've ordered. Think eBay rating, but for drugs and other illegal stuff. One day and one conversation sticks in my mind as probably the most memorable thing that's ever happened while I was on the dark web, and this particular sales site. I was browsing the content just for the hell of it, seeing what was out there that I may have wanted to blow money on, and I saw an entry that was a bit strange. Girlfriend for sale. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. Maybe someone was selling their old silicone doll and wanted to have an eye-catching title. I went to the page and I scrolled down to the description, and it didn't help any more than the title. It simply said, "Selling my girlfriend, message for details." At this point, I felt like I had to message the person, so I did. Here's how the conversation went. I said, "I wanted to ask about your girlfriend for sale." He said, "All right, what do you want to know?" I said, "Pretty much everything." He says, "All right, she's 27, she's a bit on the thicker side, she has black hair, green eyes, and freckles." And there was more information that he included here. He used other words to describe her body type, gave exact measurements, and went into a bit of personal details about her as well. I'm not going to put them in here as I want to keep this story out of graphic territory. And after he told me all of this, I obviously knew it wasn't a sex doll. He was legitimately trying to sell a real person. I wasn't sure what to do or say at this point, so I simply said, "Go on." He said, "Would you like to see her? It may make it easier to see if you're really interested." I replied, "Okay." He then sent me a few pictures of this woman tied up and gagged in his basement. She looked exactly like how he had described. Her wrists were bound with duct tape, and she had a chain around her neck that looked to be connected to a concrete pillar in a basement. The look on her face was one of legitimate terror, and you could tell that she had been crying excessively and her hair was a mess. He then sent me photos of her in what I'll describe as compromising situations and positions. Again, I won't get into the details, but it honestly made me want to vomit. When I clicked on this entry on the site, I was expecting it to be a joke, but these pictures and what he told me, I was pretty certain that this was real, and that scared the hell out of me. Then he sent me another message. He said, "I have one other interested buyer that's offering $70,000 cash by next week. If you can get me at least $75,000, she's yours." I was so shocked that the only thing I could even think to do was to ask what her name was, to which he replied, "Sorry, I can't give out her name in case you want to do something stupid, like try to find her or contact the police." I replied with, "Oh no, I wouldn't dare. I was just curious." His response to that chilled me to the bone. He said, "Good, because it wouldn't matter. There's no one that'll miss her, and on paper, she's been dead for a month. I do what I can to make my transaction stress-free, and that includes my prospective buyers. I expect them to help me keep things stress-free as well, so please don't do anything stupid." He compounded that last sentence with a smiley face emoticon, which really added to the threat, to be honest. I honestly had no idea what to say. I didn't know if this was legitimate or if it was a honeypot seller trying to arrest human traffickers. I just told him that I would try to get the money together, and if he didn't hear from me by the time the other seller came through, that it was fine. I didn't want to raise any alarms with this guy, regardless of who he really was. And I really don't have much more to this story, other than to say that I have no idea what happened to her or to the seller. I didn't follow up, and I just kind of let the situation go. I know, this makes me an awful person, and I've definitely lost sleep over it, but I'm more hopeful that it was just a honeypot and that he was trying to lure me into being arrested more than actually trying to sell his girlfriend. My dark web story is one that actually happened recently, like within the last 4 or 5 months, actually. And it's one of the most disturbing and sickening things that I've ever seen or experienced in my 32 years of being on this earth. There are some really sick people out there, and I want to say to those of you that are listening, stay off the dark web. Enjoy the stories that are told by those of us that were stupid enough to get involved in it, but don't get curious enough to drag yourself into the mud. Like most people, living in this quarantine has left me with an excessive amount of spare time on my hands. I'm still employed, thankfully, but I get to work from the comfort of my living room. I'm not going to name my employer or my job title for obvious security reasons, but I will say that I'm pretty much the guy on the network team that gets to sit at home and watch data traffic spikes for the company's applications and websites. To be honest, I probably have one of the easiest jobs out there. I have to watch a graph system as it shows how much data our servers are pushing and receiving, and unless we get hit with a denial of service attack, there's not much to be done. If anything does happen, I have to get on the phone and talk with the other networking guys about what actions we want to take, and then have my weekly report call with my boss to tell her that everything is working as intended. We aren't a huge company, and we've upgraded our servers at the end of last year, which was perfect timing. So there's honestly not a whole lot to do on the day-to-day. Based on what I just said, you can probably assume that I know my way around a computer. I've been in IT my whole career, and I like to believe that I can hold my own out there. I know how networks run, I understand data routing, and I know a lot about data encryption and security. During the start of quarantine, I started studying more about data security and such, and ended up being interested in Tor, onion routing, and how the deep web and the dark web differ from the surface web. If you want some interesting reads, you should really look into the Mariana's Web. It's an interesting rabbit hole. As most technically adapted people do, I got both bored and curious about what existed out there in the deeper parts of the internet. I didn't want to do anything illegal, but part of me wanted to be familiar with what content and activities existed beyond the surface. I know this is stupid, but boredom and extra time can be a terrifying motivator when you kind of want to know what you're doing. I went through the process of setting up my personal system to get on the deep web, installed Tails, set up Tor, I got a decent VPN after some vetting, and I did my security checks. I started going through some of the onion links that were easily accessible. For the most part, they were innocent sites that really didn't have anything crazy on them. I was simply perusing the pages, not getting heavily involved. I found a lot of what you would expect to find. Some adult content, a few illegal shop sites, various conspiracy boards, and other forums. Just some basic deep web content that didn't really stand out. Then, I ended up on a page that I never would have expected to see on the deep web. A dating site. I say dating site, but based on the explanation of their service and some of the profiles, I think it was meant to be more like Tinder, like a one-night stand interaction with little to no commitment. What I found was that the dating page was set up in what I can only call categories, basically split out into what you were looking for in a partner. It had categories for race, ethnicity, background, sexual preference, personal kinks, and even a section that was basically for sugar daddies. If you don't know what that is, I'm not going to explain it to you. One category, under the personal kinks section, made me curious, as it wasn't something that I was sure about. It was called Chasers. I clicked on it and decided that I would spend a few minutes looking through the profiles. And what I ended up finding was nothing short of legitimately terrifying. The profile that I clicked on was of a middle-aged guy. He was fairly attractive and looked like someone that would do well on any of the dating apps. I was reading through who he was, trying to figure out what the hell made him a chaser when I got to the bottom of his profile. It read the following: I'm looking for anyone that can help me achieve my lifelong dream of being physical with an HIV-infected individual. This entire section further outlined how it was a goal of his to catch the disease, and that he was willing to pay almost any amount to do this. I went to another profile, and it was a young man that explained he had been infected with COVID and that he would be willing to give it to anyone that wanted it for the price of a nice dinner. The third profile that I went to was looking for someone to hurt or severely injure them while being intimate. And I'm not even going to explain the specifics of what he wanted, but that person definitely needed to seek some help. This entire category was of people looking to catch diseases or give diseases to one another, and a few were looking to be injured. A lot of them were looking to pay for these services, saying that it was a deep fantasy of theirs. I think the most disgusting one, besides the ones that I already mentioned, was a man that was requesting to be with a woman that had terminal cancer. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with being with someone that has cancer. I have no issue with that, but he was treating it like a fetish and listed in his profile that the sicker, the better. Again, he listed that he was willing to pay significant amounts of money or even take care of medical costs for this. This site cemented in my mind that there were some very, very disturbed people out there. I closed it and I shut down my laptop. I won't say it was the last time that I ever got on the deep web, but it definitely made me more careful about where I went and less curious about what was out there. I'm not one to ever advocate for using the dark web for any purpose other than just pure entertainment, and even then you should keep your curiosity a bit higher on the surface, like at the deep web level. Satiate yourself with the pages that host the dumb conspiracy theories, the adult content that's legal, and the other anonymity-wrapped sites that probably could exist on the surface web right next to Facebook. In the end, the dark web is for illegal activities, not everyday use, and there are too many people out there that have a strange curiosity for it. Just don't. Full stop. I want to preface this by saying that I'm submitting this story as anonymous for my own personal safety, for a few reasons, but I also want to note that I do not follow the beliefs or the mentalities of those in this story. When I was young, I fell into a bad group of people and was pretty much convinced that I needed to hate people because of how they looked, and I want to say that I was brainwashed 100%. I realize now how stupid this behavior and this mindset was, but a lot of younger men are out there, and they're a product of their environment, and it's incredibly difficult to not fall into these groups whenever they start to notice you. My anonymity is for two reasons. I don't want people out there to find me now and attempt to cancel me, if you will, because I was an idiot in the past, and two, I don't want these people to find me. That said, I wanted to tell you about one of the things that I found on the dark web once. One of those things that really makes you lose all of your faith in humanity. Back when I was younger, probably 10 or so years ago, I used to be the edgy 20-year-old that thought I was so cool because I was hanging out in all the dark and the freaky parts of the internet. I'm not proud of who I was. I used to be on some of the boards that most people would see as reprehensible, and I was honestly brainwashed into certain things that I no longer believe. Those boards are seriously filled with some of the most reprehensible people that are of the mind that they are superior in every way. Anyways, in my time on one particular board, I won't name the name, obviously, as I don't want to give them any clout or traffic, I got in with a very specific group of people. I'll call them the Knights for the sake of this story, but that's not what they were called. For the most part, this group was full of supremacists and other very, very sick people. And while I was sort of into the same ideology of them at the time, these guys were on a whole nother level. I remember that they would discuss high-profile enemies, as they would call them, and they would discuss what they wanted to do to them. Usually, these people were of a specific ethnicity or origin, and usually the conversation would steer quickly towards cleanings. I would typically stay out of these conversations and would just read what the higher-ups in the groups had to say, and it was never pleasant. Most of the time, these targets would be politicians, local leaders, various TV personalities, and the like. It was pretty clear that this group practically fantasized about harming these people, and they would state their intentions as graphically as they could. While this, in and of itself, is pretty sickening, it's just words. And yes, words have weight, but if they aren't being acted upon, then they remain just words. And that's what most of this was. Of course, after a while, some of the posts would slowly morph from angry words towards celebrities to basically doxing people local to the posters. They would go as far as posting photos of people of different ethnicities in their yards, at their homes, including a ton of personally identifiable information like where they worked, their home addresses, what they drove, their schedule. I remember there was one post where one of the members had actually uploaded a quick video of himself breaking into one of their homes during the day. He mentioned in the video that he did so because he knew they wouldn't be home, and in the video, he actually trashed their home. He rampages through their living room, he smashed their TV, broke mirrors. He seriously just trashed their entire house and then ran out and got away from the scene. And again, as terrible as destruction of private property was, it got worse. And this is where I personally checked out of the whole thing. There was a post from one of the users that was, I believe, in Texas. He made a post about how he found some people that were out in the open area near the border, and he made it very clear that these were immigrants crossing over. He detailed how he had spoken to them when he found them and how he had told them that they could stay in a property nearby that he owned. He had led them to an abandoned business, again claiming he owned it and then letting them in. Then he said that once they trusted him and were thinking that they would be able to lie low in the building, he pulled out a gun and shot and murdered them. He was gloating about how he had seriously murdered a couple of people that were crossing the border solely because he didn't like them. He was proud of this. The sick piece of garbage was bragging about how he was a murderer. One of the other users posted a comment that told him to prove it and that he would be rewarded if it were true. He then did prove it. He posted several photos of the people with a piece of paper that contained his user tag. Then he posted a picture of a child and mentioned that he didn't want to shoot the kid, but he didn't know what to do now that she was an orphan. That one user that told him to prove that he'd committed the murders told him that if he could get the child out of the state and a bit up north, he knew someone that would pay him for her. I stopped reading the thread after that, mostly because it clicked in me just how sick these people really were, how disgusting some individuals can seriously be. If anyone is curious, I did contact the police. I screenshot everything that I had seen, and I got in touch with and then personally met with a local officer. I showed them the page, I gave them all the information that I had, and I have to guess that they wanted to further investigate me, but seeing as how I was basically snitching on these guys, they didn't. And like I said before, I'm a totally different person now. I do not believe in any of the ideology that those people touted or pushed. And thinking of what I did believe back then still makes me sick to my stomach. To anyone out there that's in with these people or thinks like them, I hope you come to your senses. And to anyone out there that's thinking of hopping onto the dark web, please take this as a reason not to. I wanted to post this story up in hopes of explaining the horror that you can actually find on the dark web. Honestly, most of the things you find on the dark web aren't actually the horror movie cliche-laden websites that everyone seems to think they are. Most of the dark web is questionable or illegal adult content, some people trying to buy medications, stuff like that. If you are wanting something like what you see in the movies, you have to actually know where to look, as in have an onion link. I'm not saying that those things don't exist, they just aren't easily or readily available. A lot of people tend to think that it's like a dark version of Google, where you can search for crazy stuff and be given results within a few moments, but it's really not. Anyways, that out of the way, I wanted to talk about a dark web experience that was honestly horrifying for my friends and I. This was several years ago. I think we were 17 at the time, and we thought we were hackers. I know, it sounds stupid, but the three of us were all about the nerdy crap: Python, networking, and again, quote unquote, hacking. I'll spare myself the embarrassment in explaining all of that. Just know that we knew our way around a computer. Naturally, the three of us gravitated toward places like Reddit, and then 4chan, and things like that. I don't remember where we heard about the dark web, probably from a friend, the news, or on one of the aforementioned websites, but when we learned about the difference between surface web and dark web, our curiosity was piqued. We started looking into what it was, what was out there, and what we could do, and of course, we were enchanted with the hacker haven that it was glorified to be. We thought we would get on there, look at some of the questionable sites, and be the coolest kids because we accessed content that others didn't even know existed. So we did what we had to do. We loaded up Tor, we got information for some onion links, and got ready to have our minds blown. Of course, it ended up not being as interesting as we thought it was going to be. The sites were plain and bland. We saw a couple of sites selling pills, others that we didn't even bother scrolling through because of the front pages, and a few webcam sites that we honestly just weren't interested in. I think all of us were getting a bit disappointed in what we were finding, though I don't know what we were expecting to find, really. I think we just started clicking through and going anywhere and everywhere that we could get to. Looking back, this was a really stupid idea. After clicking around for a while, we ended up on a page that looked a little flashier than the others. I can't remember the name of the page, but I think it was something along the lines of "Your Choice," or something like that. As we started on the home screen, the whole page looked like it was a site for a butcher shop. There were a number of pictures of meat slices and cuts all over the front page, explaining the quality and what seasoning went best with each piece. Unfortunately, I think you all can see where this is going. We ended up on a page with a list of cuts, and each of them had a diagram of a person. The part where the meat came from was highlighted. Some of what was on the page was horribly graphic, so I won't explain it in this story, but you can imagine what all was there. One of the most disturbing parts of this website was its explanation on its sourcing. I recall it explaining that all packaging would be discreet and that they would include their own seasoning packet that would go best with whatever you chose. What's worse, they explained that all of their meat was fresh and sourced on demand. They touted the fact that they had the ability to get everything when it was ordered. Obviously, we were freaked out by seeing this kind of meat. We got off the site and pretty much immediately removed Tor. We all kept up our pursuits in the IT world, but I don't think any of us have ever been back to the dark web ever since. Alright, so check this out. I have an interesting dark web story from a perspective that most people don't get. Namely, from the perspective of someone that used to actually work for an associate of a site that was sort of like Silk Road. Nowadays, I do work for a company that contracts out cybersecurity stuff. Mostly penetration testing and threat hunting. It's fun. I like working on the safe side of things and, doing work for the man and getting paid to break things for them. And I'll never go back to the dark side of things, especially after what happened. I'm not trying to hype it up. What happened was absolutely horrifying, but it's the truth, and it's what happens when mistakes are made working with criminals. So, like I said, I used to work with a couple of guys that did dark web style business, mostly selling illegal stuff like drugs and, mostly just drugs. In fact, it's best just to say that we sold a lot of substances to people that couldn't or wouldn't get a prescription for premium. We had a lot of customers, and most of them were repeat customers, and we had a very well-encrypted list of everyone that we had worked with in the past, including their regular orders, and we had a very well-constructed method of shipping. We would ship the items in boxes that looked like they were from other companies, and we would hide the good stuff with the other stuff in ways that made it, well, unlikely that they'd be found. This was also a while back, before Silk Road was actually busted, so people weren't really looking for substances like that in the mail. Now, my part of this operation was actually system security. I was in charge of keeping the site running and making sure no one ever got the information that we held, including who was in the operation and the list of customers. I was good at my job, and we never got hit by a honeypot operative. I was pretty good at sniffing out cops that were trying to do purchases, and we never had any security or downtime issues. I also kept the overall site looking clean, which may not be something that really means anything, but to me, we had the nicest looking dark web market that ever existed. I was actually proud of the work that I had done on it. Now that you know me and the operation and the site and all that stuff, let's talk about the part of it that became problematic. A man that you and I can simply call Rob. Rob was the ringleader of the whole thing, and we knew that he was in charge. Hell, most of us just accepted that it was his business, and as long as we got paid, we didn't really care what went on. Rob was the business major that had decided working doing illegal stuff was the best way to pay back the money he owed on his student loans, and he was a bit cocky when it came to doing the work he did. He was actually arrested at one point on unrelated charges, and we all thought we were going to be next, seeing as how he liked to talk so much. Thankfully, nothing happened and he was let go. He said it was because he had a good lawyer, but I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about the situation that actually happened. As I said, we all ran a little business on the dark web selling illegal substances. Things went smoothly and everyone was happy. That is, until they didn't, and then nobody was happy. Despite all of the minor hiccups that did happen, it wasn't a huge deal until we had one specific customer that was very displeased with our service. We're going to call this customer Chris. Chris had a drug addiction, and Chris was probably our most frequent customer, and Chris was also a very aggressive person when it came to communications. I know what you're thinking. Why are you in frequent communications with a customer if you are selling illegal items on the dark web? Well, unfortunately, it was Chris that was in communications with us, and there was always something wrong with his order. I wasn't involved in getting the content, the shipping, or the actual business side, so I mostly just ignored the situation. I ran the back-end servers, which included our messaging system, so I saw all the communication that went on. Unfortunately, Rob, being the hard-headed jerk that he was, he liked to antagonize. And he would do that to Chris when he was being irrational. He would message him saying that he was an idiot, to not purchase from us ever again, etc. The last time this all went down, Chris messaged back saying that if we didn't get his order right, he was going to go to the cops. Now, there are a handful of things you don't do when you're dealing with people on the dark web, and one of them is to threaten to contact the police and shut down the whole operation. When this message came through, Rob sent out a correspondence to all of us that this customer was to be blacklisted, and that he would be contacting people within other markets to make sure he was never sold to again. The problem is, Rob sent this to Chris as well. My guess was that it was to send a message. You mess with us, I cut you off. while there are things that you don't do to those that operate dark web businesses, there are also things that you don't do to irate drug addicts that know how to use the dark web. This situation went from unsavory to absolute hell. At the time of all of this happening, I was actually staying with Rob for a few days due to some personal issues at home. He had turned the back half of his basement into a bit of a spare room and a server closet, so I was lucky enough to sleep where my work was. Anyways, I was actually downstairs working on something irrelevant to the situation when I heard what sounded like someone kicking in a door. I immediately ran up to the top of the stairs, but I stopped in the doorway to see what the hell was going on. There, I see a 6-foot-something guy that had to be north of 300 pounds standing in the doorway with what looked like a shotgun in his hands and Rob on his knees, literally begging this guy not to kill him. I heard Rob call him Chris, which told me all I needed to know. This was not going to end well, and I was likely going to be next. I stepped quickly down the stairs as quietly as I could, and I went down into the area beneath the steps, just basically behind the server closet, and I dialed 911 on my phone. When they answered, I just told them the address and said I needed officers immediately because there was a man with a gun that had just broken in and hung up. I didn't want to give them any of my information since, I'm also kind of a criminal. But no more than a few seconds after I hung up, I heard screaming and then I heard a gunshot. I knew what that meant. I waited there until I was certain that he had left, and then I did the most cowardly thing that I could. I climbed my way back up and out of the basement window with my backpack, and I walked calmly to the McDonald's that was pretty much across the street so I could see what played out. The cops showed up, and then the ambulance, and then the coroner and the crime scene guys. I listened to the police radio to see if they ever caught the guy. There was some crosstalk about the situation, but in the end, they jumped over to encrypted channels and I lost track of what they were doing. My stay at Rob's house was a very temporary thing, and I had most of my stuff in my backpack, so I wasn't overly worried about them knowing that I was there. I did go into cleanup mode with the servers, though. They were nuked entirely, so no information was ever pulled. It was a pretty messed up situation, and I really did feel bad for what happened to Rob, but in the end, if you're going to work as a criminal, you have to face the consequences of being a criminal. Did he deserve to die? No, absolutely not, but that's not how Chris saw it. So, my final suggestion: avoid the dark web. Deep web stuff is fine, it's pretty safe, but do not go down that rabbit hole because sometimes what you find may be unpredictable. I have a story that actually got me off the deep and dark web altogether. I actually didn't know much about everything. I was aware of what Tor was, all the encryption stuff and whatnot, but I really wasn't very well versed in what exactly made the deep and dark web different from the surface web. Well, I knew the dark web was illegal stuff, but I was curious how it was even able to exist, how things worked, and why the cops hadn't just taken it down, and so on. It was a bit of a weird, ignorant view of things, but as time went on and I educated myself, I started to understand how encryption and anonymity worked. Unfortunately, as I learned, I found myself feeling more confident. I started out as just looking around at things, and then I started commenting on forums, and then I moved on to actually communicating with the people instead of just making mindless comments. I kind of felt at home in a few of the communities, and it was nice to kind of live amongst a bunch of people all over the world and just talk about random things that had no real bearing on everyday life. It was almost my escape from reality, which isn't something that a lot of people can say. Well, as I quickly learned, the deep web isn't all rainbows and unicorns. Actually, I don't think it's rainbows and unicorns at all. I just got in with decent people. As I was perusing my usual forum, I found a post by someone that I had spoken with a few times, and I thought they were pretty cool. The forum post said something to the effect of, "Message me for an invite to the Red Friday party." I was all about parties, and again, I was comfortable with these people, so I figured it would be a good time just hanging out online with some anonymous people from the internet, chatting about nothing in particular. But what I got, however, was not a party. Now, I'm sure you can see where this is going, and I hear you probably thinking, but hey, OP, red rooms don't really exist. And I can tell that while they don't really exist as an easy-to-access node on the dark web, at least one does exist, and it's shared very privately. This Red Friday party was set up to look like a basic live stream. A camera, some dimmed out red lights, and a girl that was in front of the camera. She looked fairly normal. She didn't look upset or terrified or anything, and she was reading the chat pretty nonchalantly. At first I thought this was going to be one of those just chatting streams or whatever. I mean, people were asking her questions about herself, and she would answer shyly. Most of the questions were pretty normal. A few were a bit sexual and direct, but she would avoid those. After watching her just describe her everyday life for a few minutes, I noticed a timer on top of the screen that was counting down, and it was a couple of minutes away from 0. I waited for it to count down, and when it did, there was a ringing noise, and a guy's voice came from off-screen. He said something like, "All right, chat time is up. Now we will go into donation requests only. Get your coins ready because it's going to be a blast." I could see the look on her face shift from shy to straight up nervous. She said something like, "I don't want to do this." And then the other voice very firmly and loudly said, "You stole from me, and these guys are going to pay your debt. You do what they say until we're square, or things go south really fast." You know the saying, it's like a train wreck, you can't look away? Well, that's how this was with me. I wanted to close this out and never think about it ever again, but part of me just had to watch. The whole thing started mundane. People donated small amounts of Bitcoin for stupid things like put a shoe on your head, show us your feet, try to lick your elbow. Honestly, it was just dumb stuff at first. It wasn't that bad for the first few minutes, but then the higher amounts started to pour in for other things. They were telling her to take her clothes off and to do things that I won't even mention. She was visibly distraught the entire time, but she complied. As bad as that was, I didn't expect the next part. One person chimed in with 2 Bitcoin, which was a lot of money at the time, and he told her to cut her cheek with a knife. She shook her head no and said she couldn't do that, but the man chimed in again, told her to do it, and he handed her a small pocket knife. She started to sob and quickly sliced her cheek, causing herself to bleed. There was another donation for several more Bitcoin that said, "Cut off a finger." And she was already sobbing at this point and yelling no, saying she was done, that she wanted to leave, but the man off camera started yelling. He grabbed her hand and he did it for her. This was mortifying, obviously, but this last part got even worse. There were people donating dozens of Bitcoin to the stream, and the things that they wanted were sick. And then one chimed in with a 50 Bitcoin donation with a message that simply said, "I'm bored. Get rid of her." This was then matched by a number of other people donating similar amounts and echoing the same sentiment. I just sat there for a moment watching her scream and cry, begging for her life, and then watching a man walk into the scene of the camera with what looked like a machete. I did not continue to watch, and I will say that the thought of all of this made me physically ill. I mean, I literally threw up in the trash can by my desk. That was seriously the worst thing I have ever seen, and it completely made me swear off anything beyond the surface web. Hell, since then, I've been nearly scared to use a computer and do anything beyond just use Facebook or surf the front page of Reddit. I have no idea if what I saw was real or a pre-recorded snuff-like horror movie, or if it was even a legit Red Room-style party. I don't know if the chat was real or if the chat was pre-recorded, but part of me thinks that she was being held hostage, and what I saw actually happened. While Red Rooms may not really be a big thing, something akin to them does exist, and I highly recommend never, ever going to a dark web live stream just in case. I have a fairly short story and a personal experience that I had on the dark web, and honestly, it's actually more so a weird story than it is creepy. There's absolutely a creepy aspect to it, no doubt about that, but for the most part, it was pretty much just one of those things that you look at, get a bit curious about, and then move on with your life from there. Well, that's what I did, anyway. So, obviously, I'm a deep web user. I like to hit up a bunch of random pages that exist out there. Some are pretty tame, some of them could probably coexist alongside pages like Facebook and Reddit, but I also like to spend some of my time on sites that a lot of people would consider to be detestable, or some other adjective like that. No, I don't really spend time on illegal or gross things or any content like that, but I like what I like, and really it's just a few pages that may be morally in a gray area. And no, I'm not going to name the pages. I'm just going to say that I'm an adult and I can do what I want. Just leave it at that. I'm trying to over-justify this, and I really shouldn't be. Here's the story. One of the pages that I like to go on is a bit of a marketplace where you can buy odds and ends and the occasional oddity. There have been a lot of things that I wanted to spend money on, but then couldn't justify. Things like vials of blood from certain celebrities that are into Scientology, various bootleg DVDs of early cuts of movies, and there was even a book one time that was supposedly signed by Charles Manson, but it was a certain book that I wouldn't be caught dead owning, so as cool as having Manson's signature would be to me, I kind of moved on and accepted that it was something I'd never own. Now, as most of you know, there's a certain niche on the dark web for illegal items. Things like the aforementioned bootleg DVDs, stolen movie scripts, drugs, of course. There's a lot that you can buy on the dark web that you really shouldn't. One thing you don't usually expect to find: accessories, like personal accessories. There was one page on the market that I found that sold things like wallets, shoes, and watches, and they had what they stated to be exotic leathers available. My curiosity definitely got its grip on me, and I started looking through their wares, and I was shocked at what they claimed to have. The first thing I saw was a ton of leather made of alligator skin. It's not terribly crazy, I mean, there's certainly a market that exists on the surface for it. And then I clicked through, and they claimed to have camel leather shoes available, which I thought was cool, but again, not terribly weird if you live in a place where camels are common. Then I saw the weird stuff. Cat leather watches, dog leather wallets. It actually started to make me feel a bit bleh, thinking of someone's pet being turned into an accessory. Then I saw dolphin leather, and that, I'm pretty sure, is illegal to use. And then finally, there was a small section on the store dedicated to human leather. You heard that right. Leather made of human skin. They promised that it was durable and that it was well worth the extra money it costs to, well, source it. There was even a customization section where you could choose the ethnicity of the product if you wanted to change it up. Now again, my imagination kind of took over, and I started thinking about who the hell was buying this stuff. But with the process they would have to go through, with the amount of money they were charging, there had to be a market, right? Anyway, like I said, that's my story, and I know it was weirder than it was creepy. It's pretty sickening that it even exists, and honestly, I think I'll stick with my crappy pleather and Velcro wallet myself. This happened a couple of years ago. I don't remember the exact month or year, but it couldn't have been more than just a few years ago because Bitcoin was at or near its peak. I used to spend a lot of time on the deep web, mostly on forums and things like that, but never on anything that was explicitly illegal. I know, that sounds incredibly convincing, doesn't it? Believe it or not, there are pages on the deep web that are good for entertainment. Some of them are in the gray area as far as ethics go, but again, they're not explicitly illegal, and some of them only become illegal if you take action on the page. I think. I mean, look, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know. Anyway, I was browsing pages without intent to actually do anything on them and was just perusing through random onion links to see what interesting stuff I could find. After checking out some random pages that sold things that definitely were not legal, I found a page that, well, again, definitely was not legal. From the start of the page, I knew that this page was serious. The name of the page was something like L.H. Oswald Solutions, an obvious allusion to Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who assassinated JFK. And honestly, just seeing that kind of made me chuckle. Something about using Oswald's name for the page was genuinely humorous. After reading their information, it was pretty clear why they used that as the name. The entire page was meant for users to pay Bitcoin and hire a hitman. The page explained that they had top-tier men working for them and price categories as well. The product started at intimidation and included things like arson, murder designed to look like a failed robbery, and other tiers that were meant to make it look like an accident. But the last tier was the most expensive one, obviously, and they gave scenarios on how it could happen, including hiking incidents, accidental drownings, or car troubles. Now, I had no intent on doing anything on this page other than reading what they had to say, mostly for entertainment. But then I got to the bottom of the main page, and they had a full-on legal disclosure, which I thought was hilarious. It explained what actions could be taken if they failed and laid out their personal guarantee that they could find anyone and everyone without fail. Immediately after this was a small note at the bottom. It said, "We can find anyone and we can prove it. Click here for proof." Now, I know what you're thinking. No sane person would ever click that link, and no one could be so stupid as to click it intentionally. I didn't want to, but I had to. I had to know how they would guarantee that they could find anyone. So I clicked the button and the page switched over to a plain black site with a smiley face and an hourglass icon that indicated something was loading. After a few seconds, the hourglass turned into a check mark. At first, I thought that was it. It was just going to sit there with a check mark, and that was all. But then, much to my surprise, my cell phone started to ring. Obviously, I was freaking out inside, but I answered my phone anyway. I said, "Hello." The voice on the other end was digitized, thankfully. It basically said, "Here's your proof. Thank you for considering our services." It said that a few times and then hung up. I was actually grateful that it was a robocall and not a real person, but I was also terrified that it was able to find my number and call me. This was enough to tell me that they were not screwing around and that I needed to never go to their website or question whether or not these hitman sites are legit, ever again. If you like these allegedly true, scary, dark web stories, click or tap the video on the screen now to hear more. There's no onion links, I promise.